Hey guys, tonight we sail west into the unknown, to the very edge of the old world where the maps end in dragons, the stars blink uncertainly, and every creak of the ship sounds like the groan of fate. You're crammed in the hull of a Norse nar, a squat, sea-battered cargo ship that smells of old herring, wet wool, and fear. You're just another shadow among the crew, wrapped in a bristly cloak, hiding behind barrels of whale oil and dried cod, listening to the North Atlantic howl like it knows your name. You're not a warrior, not yet, but you've slipped aboard with the men of Greenland, including Leif Erikson, tall and calm and quiet, with the kind of beard you could store snow in. You're headed west, toward a whisper of land that Bjarni the merchant claimed to have seen. Maybe he was lying, maybe not, but it doesn't matter anymore. The sail is up, the sea doesn't care, and you're committed now. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind is biting, cutting through your clothes like a judgment. You can barely see anything through the sea mist, but the Norsemen don't flinch. They just mutter to each other, tighten the ropes, and sail straight into fog and faith. Days pass, maybe weeks. The sun barely rises before it sinks again, and your world becomes the color of pewter. Salt crusts your lips, your joints ache. At night, you hear whale song in the dark, or maybe it's something else. Then, one morning, the cry goes up. Land! You scramble up onto the deck, nearly slipping on the frosted planks. There it is, the dark line of a coast, sharp against the horizon, a place no one has ever named. No churches, no castles, no kings, just stone and shadow. You make landfall on a beach littered with flat rocks and seaweed, the sky bruised with stormlight. Leif climbs the ridge, peers around, and shrugs. Helluland, he says, the land of flat stones. It's not exactly paradise, more like the world's biggest parking lot. Cold, barren, and crawling with the kind of silence that makes you believe in spirits. So, you sail on. Next comes Markland. It's different, gentler, trees thick enough to muffle the wind, birch and fir and pine rising out of the soil like soldiers. You run your hands along the bark, grateful just to feel something living. The beaches are wide and white, littered with driftwood and bones. You gather timber, fill the ship with logs, but you don't linger. Leif has that look in his eye again, always chasing further, deeper, stranger. Days pass. Then, at last, you find it. Vinland. You step ashore into dew-drenched grass, so sweet it clings to your fingers like honey. Salmon leap in the rivers like they're trying to be caught. The air is mild, almost warm, even though you know it shouldn't be. It's like the land is lying to you, beautifully. You see vines twisting up trees, wild grapes hanging in bunches like treasure. The place hums with birdsong. You've never heard anything like it. Not in Greenland, not in Iceland, not even in the faded stories old men tell over firelight. You build your camp near a lake, drag your supplies ashore, pitch your hide tents. Each day you forage or hunt. You explore cautiously, the trees pressing in, thick and quiet. One night you wake to a rustle, a shadow in the woods, but nothing follows. Nothing ever comes too close. Not yet. The strangest moment comes with Tyrker, the German. He's been with Leif's family for years, talks to himself in his own language, wears strange charms around his neck. One afternoon, he vanishes. Just gone. Leif panics, more than you've ever seen him. You form a search party. Hours pass, the sun dips low, and then just as twilight spills across the trees, Tyrker stumbles back into camp, wild-eyed and grinning. He shouts in German first, then broken Norse, "Grapes, vines, sweet fruit everywhere." He smells like crushed berries and joy. You laugh. Leif just shakes his head. "Vinland," he says again, and this time the name fits. You think maybe this could be it, the place you settle. A new Greenland, a better one. You spend days cutting timber, drying fish, collecting fruit. It feels safe. It feels good. Until one morning, arrows whistle through camp. It happens fast. Shadows moving in the trees. A man shouts, then goes silent. Another crumples beside the fire. You grab your shield, duck behind a log, heart pounding. The Scarolings, the native people, are not amused by your little vacation in their homeland. You try to parley, to show you mean peace. But peace doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. Thorvald, Leif's brother, takes an arrow under the arm. He tries to laugh it off. Just a scratch, he mutters, blood soaking his tunic. By dusk, he's cold and still. You bury him on a hill overlooking the sea. A cross of driftwood marks the spot. You call it Crossiness. After that, everything changes. The trees feel closer, the birds quieter. You're being watched. Always. Every foraging party comes back with fewer berries and more fear. Leif decides to return home. The ship is loaded with timber, stories, and silence. As you sail away, the shoreline disappears behind mist, just as it first appeared. No statues, no markers, only the wind, whispering through the rigging like a lullaby. Historians still argue where Vinland actually was, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, even further south. But none of them know what it smelled like, what it felt like. Only you know that, because you were there when the North touched America and left with nothing but aching bones and fading memories. You lie back in your bunk on the ship, eyes heavy. The stars spin overhead, and you dream of rivers full of salmon, grass wet with dew, and a land that doesn't want to be known. The wind slices across your face like broken glass, colder than any breath you've ever felt, and your nose has been numb for days. You're standing on the deck of a French ship called La Grande Hermine, somewhere along the wide, silent waters of the St. Lawrence River. The year is 1535. Your captain is Jacques Cartier, and he swears Asia is right around the next bend. He says it with that French confidence that almost makes you believe him, until you look over the side of the ship and realize the river is starting to freeze. You didn't sign up for this. Not really. You heard there would be exploration, maybe even gold, maybe something exotic. What you got was salted cod, frozen boots, and frostbite in places you didn't even know could freeze. The sky is steel gray. The river groans under the weight of new ice. Somewhere out there, between fog and forest, are people watching you. The Stadakonans. You didn't expect them. No one did. They glide through the trees in soft moccasins, their canoes cutting through ice like knives. Their village, Stadacona, sits close by, a maze of bark-covered lodges, fires that never go out, and stores of food that make you feel embarrassingly unprepared. Donnacona, their leader, is cautious. He offers food, signs for peace, and you pretend you understand each other. You nod, he nods, you smile, he doesn't. Cartier is more excited about maps than diplomacy. Every time Donnacona gestures vaguely inland, Cartier's eyes light up. He keeps repeating the word Saguenay, some mythical golden kingdom up the river. You think he made it up. Historians still argue whether Saguenay ever existed or if it was just the product of bad translations and worse expectations. You help build a crude fort near the village, mostly from frozen mud and wishful thinking. It's the kind of construction that looks like it would collapse if you sneezed too hard. Still, it's better than the ship, which smells like mildew, wet wool, and regret. The ship's cat refuses to come below deck anymore. You start to take that personally. Then the snow comes. Not gently, not in flurries. It comes in sheets, in slabs, in walls. It buries everything. The trees vanish beneath the white. The river groans like it's having second thoughts. Your hands are cracked and bleeding. Firewood is running low, and so is food. You've eaten everything edible, then everything possibly edible, then things that used to be furniture. You suspect someone tried boiling the leather sail. By December, you're down to salted meat and prayer. And then something starts happening to the men. Their gums swell, their teeth loosen, their joints ache, skin bruises black and splits open. It's scurvy, that lovely disease that follows every sea voyage like a loyal dog. Half the crew is bedridden, some are dead. You're barely holding on. You dream of citrus, of cabbage, of literally any vegetable. Then, a miracle. The Stadaconans offer help, a cedar-based tea brewed from bark and needles. It smells like swamp water. You're skeptical, but you're also dying, so you drink. The effect is almost immediate. Your bleeding stops, your limbs ease, you feel your energy return like someone turning up the heat in your bones. Cartier acts like he discovered the cure. Classic. But you know better. You saw the quiet way Donnacona's people gathered the bark, how they handled it like something sacred. You watched them, and you learned. Not everyone does. As the river begins to thaw in early spring, a strange tension settles over the camp. The Stadaconans have grown wary. You see fewer smiles, fewer gestures of peace. Then one morning, Cartier calls for you. You arrive at the ship just in time to see Donnacona being dragged aboard, bound, struggling, betrayed. Cartier says it's diplomacy, that the King of France will want to hear from a native leader directly. You know what it is. Theft. Of a man, of trust, of dignity. The Stadaconans gather on the shoreline, silent and still. No weapons drawn, no cries of protest. Just stillness, the kind that haunts you more than violence. As the anchor is raised, you stare at the shoreline, trying to memorize every curve of the trees, every bend in the snowy trail. You don't know it yet, but Donnacona will never return. He will die in France, his words translated into royal confusion, his legacy twisted into tales of gold and riches that never were. You sail downriver in silence. The cold is softer now. The ice breaks with a sigh instead of a scream. Spring is coming, but you feel no warmth in your chest. You keep hearing Donnacona's voice in your mind, that deep, steady cadence, the way he pointed to the mountains and spoke of lands beyond them. And you remember the children in Stadacona, their laughter, their bare feet in the snow, the gifts they gave you, woven cords, wooden carvings, a single feather tucked into your sleeve. You still have it. You keep it hidden in your pack, wrapped in linen, safer than your maps. As you reach the Gulf and the salty wind returns, the crew begins to speak of glory, of what they'll tell the king, of their part in the legend of New France. You stay quiet. You know legends are stitched together from half-truths and bruised memories. You know that survival isn't the same as conquest. Back in France, there will be banquets and ceremonies and talk of new worlds. But here, in the rhythm of the waves, you hear the truth, that the land already had its own history, its own heroes, and you were only ever passing through. You lie on your back beneath the sails, the stars above you glittering like frost. The cedar feather presses against your ribs with each breath, and in the wind you hear voices, not ghosts, not dreams, but echoes of a village that taught you how to live when the cold wanted you dead.
You wake to the sound of mosquitoes, not just a few, a chorus, a swarm, a living cloud of buzzing hunger that's already bitten through your cloak, your patience, and most of your dignity. You slap one off your neck, sit up from your patch of damp grass, and look around. Welcome to the American South, year 1530-something. Your boots are gone, your beard is full of burrs, you haven't seen a city or a proper meal in weeks, and you're traveling with a man named Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, a name so dramatic it should belong to a theater actor, not a half-starved barefoot conquistador. Once, not long ago, you were part of a proud Spanish expedition, banners flying, armor gleaming, ambitions burning as hot as the Florida sun. But Florida had other plans. Swamps, storms, mosquitoes the size of sparrows, and people people who were not impressed by your helmets or your muskets or your talk of empires. Now, it's just you, Cabeza de Vaca, and a dwindling handful of survivors wandering through the wilderness, somewhere between Texas and despair. You carry no journal, but if you did, the last few entries would read something like, lost another man to fever, still hungry, found a shellfish, argued over it, rain again, everything smells like wet goat. You trudge through pine forests, wade across rivers, and skirt the edges of villages where smoke curls upward like a warning. The native tribes, Karankawa, Tonkawa, Gowiltakan, watch you from a distance. Sometimes they approach. Sometimes they vanish. Sometimes they help. Sometimes they don't. You're not a conqueror anymore. You're a beggar. Cabeza de Vaca is changing too. He no longer talks about gold or glory. He talks about dreams, about visions, about God speaking through storms. Historians still debate whether he became something like a mystic during this long wandering or just cracked from hunger and sunstroke. Either way, he's the only one who seems to believe you'll make it out alive. You travel light, mostly because everything you once owned is now lost, traded, or stolen. Your clothes are rags. Your shoes, gone. Your dignity, hanging by a thread. You walk barefoot across cactus fields, along cracked earth and stones that sear your skin. At night, you sleep in groves of trees filled with the hiss of insects. You learn which roots not to eat the hard way. But the strangest thing, you start to adapt. You begin to move like the people here, silent, soft-footed. You learn which leaves soothe the skin, which tree barks make decent tea, which insects are edible. Most, unpleasantly, are. You carve tools from bone, build fires with flint, and occasionally, just occasionally, feel like the land might accept your presence. You're taken in by one tribe, then another. Sometimes you're a guest, sometimes a captive, something in between. You help carry water, patch thatched roofs, join hunts for armadillo and deer. A woman shows you how to trap birds using only twine and sticks. A child laughs when you flinch at a harmless lizard. You start to feel human again. Cabeza de Vaca watches everything, absorbs it. He listens more than he speaks. You can tell he's storing it all away, not just for survival, but for something larger, for meaning. One night, you sit by a fire, roasting something unidentifiable on a stick, when Cabeza de Vaca says quietly, "Maybe we were never meant to conquer this place." You don't know what to say, so you nod. The fire cracks. Somewhere in the dark, an owl calls. The next day, you meet Estebayiko, a black man from Morocco, once enslaved, now a fellow traveler, equal in misery and endurance. His smile is quiet, wry. He walks lightly, like the ground owes him nothing. You learn quickly he's the best navigator you've got, better than the stars. He knows how to read the way branches break, how clouds gather, how animals shift in the underbrush. Without him, you'd still be lost in the same mangrove swamp from a year ago. Together, you and the survivors, now only 4, travel nearly 2,500 miles over the course of 8 brutal years. You witness things no one back in Spain would believe. Masked dances under moonlight, rituals of healing, feasts of roasted roots and honey. You see empires that the conquistadores never knew existed. You learn how little you knew about the world and how small your own stories really are. In one village, a sick child is brought to you. The locals say you're a healer now. You're terrified, of course, but you touch the child's forehead, whisper a prayer, mimic what you've seen their own medicine men do. The next morning, the child is better. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not. Word spreads. In the next village, they bring 10 more sick. You treat them with herbs, prayers, sometimes just water and hope, and they begin to believe. Not in your flag, not in your king, not in your empire, but in you. And the strangest part, you believe too, not in your own power, but in theirs, in the healing that comes from respect, from humility, from witnessing a world with open eyes instead of steel and fire. Finally, near the mountains of what will one day be called Mexico, you encounter other Spaniards, fat, armored, loud. They barely recognize you. You don't recognize yourself. You look like them, but you are not them. They talk of conquest, of cities to burn, of gods to erase. You listen in silence, the same silence the forest once taught you, and you realize something. The journey may be over, but your truth is not welcome in their version of history. Cabeza de Vaca will write his journal. He'll speak of wonders, of empathy, of seeing the land not as something to take, but something to learn from. He'll be dismissed. Too poetic, too strange, not Spanish enough. Historians still argue whether his words were exaggeration or revelation. But you know the truth. You lived it. You curl up that night under a thin blanket of stars, the ground warm beneath you. No gold, no metals, just memory. The sweet aftertaste of cedar tea, the calluses on your feet, the people whose names were never written down, but whose lives saved you again and again. You drift off and dream of walking, always walking, through a land that never needed your maps, only your respect.
The heat wraps around you like a wet blanket, thick and breathless. You wake up in your hammock inside a crude log stockade built hastily along the riverbank. Outside, the dawn buzzes with insects. You scratch your arms, already bitten, and reach for the same ragged shirt you've worn for weeks. It reeks of mildew and fire smoke. You're in Florida. It's the year 1564, and you're part of a failing French dream. You arrived with Jean Ribault, a Huguenot commander with a sharp beard, sharper faith, and visions of a Protestant haven in the New World. His voice was thunder in France. We will build a city of God in this wild land. You believed him. That's how you ended up sailing across the Atlantic in a cramped wooden ship, dodging Spanish warships and tropical storms. And now you're here, at the edge of the unknown, trying to survive in a rotting wooden fort named Caroline. The walls are made of palmetto logs and prayers. You helped build them. You remember hacking through thickets of vines, sweating buckets, and bleeding from your hands while the fort slowly rose in the swampy air. You thought it would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like desperation. The food ran out quickly. The ships didn't return. The flour turned sour, the meat spoiled, and the river fish became fewer by the day. You traded with the local Timucua, who wore feathers and shell necklaces and seemed amused at your clumsiness. They brought maize and venison, sometimes. You gave them cloth, knives, and beads, but the friendship didn't last. You were warned. The oldest soldiers said trust is thin in the New World. The Timucua saw what your kind had done in other places, and once some of the Frenchmen started stealing from their camps, chickens, dried squash, even sacred objects, the alliance cracked. They stopped coming. Then they disappeared into the trees altogether. Inside the fort, morale crumbled. The air stank of mold and sweat. You saw men gnawing at leather straps. One tried to eat a dog. Another dug up roots no one could identify and boiled them in muddy water. They called it stew.
You called it suicide. That man died 3 days later, raving about wolves. Laudonnière, your new commander, tried to hold things together. He paced the fort every morning, writing in a journal, his beard flecked with gray. He offered prayers, rations, small hopes. But hope was running low. The men muttered at night. Some plotted mutiny. Others ran away. You kept quiet mostly, because your legs were too weak from hunger to run anywhere. Then, one day, sails appeared on the horizon. You blinked against the sun, unsure if it was real, but they were French. Ribault had returned with reinforcements, supplies, fresh linen, muskets, and news. He'd seen Spanish ships too, and they were angry. Spain and France had never been friends, but this was different. The Spanish saw your Protestant settlement as heresy. Menendez de Velez had been sent by the Spanish crown to cleanse the land. He brought a fleet. He brought soldiers. He brought orders. Ribault decided to strike first. He took most of the fleet south toward the Spanish position, hoping to catch them unprepared. You stayed behind, under Laudonnière, holding Fort Caroline with barely 150 exhausted men. Then, the storm came. Historians still debate whether that hurricane was divine punishment, sheer miscalculation, or just the terrible luck that follows every colonial venture. But it hit hard. The winds tore trees from the ground. The rain came in sheets, flooding tents, collapsing roofs. You sheltered under barrels, holding your breath, waiting for the sky to stop screaming. When the storm ended, Fort Caroline was half drowned. The men were soaked, hungry, cold. That's when Menendez attacked. He didn't come by ship. He came by swamp. Through miles of wet jungle, he marched his soldiers, hidden by fog, with silence on their side. At dawn, they breached the fort. You awoke to shouting, a scream, steel against wood, then a gunshot, then another. You grabbed your blade and stumbled outside, where everything was chaos. The palmetto walls were breached. Spanish soldiers in steel breastplates poured through the gate, their swords wet with blood. You saw one man, someone you shared a bunk with, split open from collarbone to stomach. You ran. You didn't think. You leapt over fallen beams, slipped in the mud, dodged a pike thrust, and sprinted into the forest. Only a few of you escaped. You spent the next days hiding among mangroves. Your hands trembled. Your stomach screamed. You drank from puddles and ate insects. Eventually, you joined up with the ragged remnants of Ribault's fleet, which had been destroyed in the hurricane. The survivors had been shipwrecked south of the fort, and Menendez found them too. He rounded them up, 200 men, and lined them along a sandbar. Asked them if they were Catholic, one by one. If they said yes, he spared them. If they said no, he slit their throats. You watched from the trees, holding your breath. That place is now called Matanzas. It means slaughter. Ribault was among the dead. Some say he faced death bravely. Others say he wept. You'll never know. Only you saw the bloodstains in the sand after the Spanish left. Weeks later, a French ship arrived, too late to help. They picked up what few of you remained. You sailed home, not as heroes, not even as survivors, but as ghosts of a dream that had rotted in the Florida sun. Back in France, no one asked about the dead. No one sang songs for Fort Caroline. It vanished from maps as if it had never existed. But in your memory, it still stands. The creak of the watchtower, the the stink of wet canvas, the laughter of comrades during better days, the snap of musket fire in the fog. You lie now beneath the stars, wrapped in a blanket someone lent you out of pity. You run a finger along a coin you took from the fort, the only thing that made it back. A small French coin, dented and blackened. Worthless. Priceless. You close your eyes and smell the swamp again. See the river, the palmetto trees. And in the wind, you hear the voices of those who stayed behind. Not gone, just forgotten.
You awaken to cold mist on your face and the groaning creak of wood beneath your boots. The morning air slices through your coat like knives. You don't know if it's June or November anymore. Here in the northern wastes of Hudson Bay, time has stopped moving in any meaningful direction. Ice clings to the rigging like barnacles made of glass. Somewhere in the pale gray distance, a man coughs wet, low, and close to death. Another day begins. You are aboard the Discovery, a ship too small and too fragile for the dreams she carries. It's 1611. Your captain, Henry Hudson, is obsessed with finding a way through the Arctic. He believes the Northwest Passage, an ocean route to China through the top of the world, is just around the corner. Every mile you travel seems to prove him wrong. The ship is trapped in ice for most of the year, and now even the ice seems bored of waiting. You've spent the winter huddled in the hull, chewing on salted fish and regret. The cold turned your fingernails blue. Rats became more familiar than half the crew. You watched grown men scream in their sleep, not because of nightmares, but because their frozen feet cracked open when they tried to move. Hunger has made everything look edible. Once, you caught a man trying to eat his bootlaces. Another chewed raw wood from the oar handle. You tried not to judge. You understood. At first, Hudson kept spirits high. He quoted scripture, sketched maps by firelight, and claimed God had led them to this place. But faith is difficult when your lips split from frost and your captain's promises never thaw. You notice the looks begin to change. Conversations shifted when he was not around. Men started whispering while sharpening knives. You knew something was coming. It wasn't sudden, the way mutinies are often portrayed. There was no shouting, no sabers drawn in defiance, just a quiet, deliberate movement. Henry Hudson was placed in a small, open boat with his teenage son, a few loyal followers, a musket, and some stale provisions. They were pushed from the ship's edge into the bitter water. The rest of you stood silently on the deck. No one said a word, not Hudson, not his son, not the crew who had once sworn loyalty. It was June 22, 1611. Historians still debate what broke the crew's resolve. Some blame starvation. Others believe Hudson ignored every warning, pushing past the limits of human endurance. Perhaps he knew there was no passage, but couldn't bear to return empty-handed. Or maybe he saw something out there, some glimmer of hope you never did. The small boat drifted until it vanished into fog. That image never leaves you. Even now, back in England, warm and fed, you wake in a sweat, remembering the way his eyes met yours as you released the rope. He didn't beg. He didn't weep. That made it worse. A silence that deep is hard to explain. It sticks with you longer than screams. You try to tell yourself you were only doing what needed to be done, that he would have doomed the entire crew, that the ship had no chance of survival with him in command. But the guilt always finds cracks in your reasoning. The return journey was hardly a rescue. Food ran out again. Men died from illness, exposure, despair. One morning you buried a boy wrapped in sailcloth, stitching it shut through his nose as custom demands to ensure he wouldn't wake beneath the water. That final stitch is burned into your memory more than any storm or hardship, a ritual against hope. When you reached England,
There was no parade, no celebration, just questions. What happened to Hudson? Why did you return without him? The survivors offered different stories. Most were quiet. A few lied. No charges were filed. No one wanted scandal. But you were never the same. You think often of the beginning, of the voyage's early days, the sunlight sparkling on northern waves, the laughter of men not yet broken. You recall Hudson poring over charts, insisting that Asia was close, that if only you pushed a little farther, you would sail into legend. He believed it so deeply that you started to believe too. You also remember the cold settling in for the first time, the way the sea froze silently overnight, trapping the Discovery in a prison of ice. The long, dark months, your breath hanging in the air like a ghost you could never shake, and the way the stars looked above the Arctic, bright and cruel, like diamonds over a grave. You kept something from that voyage, a scrap of paper torn from Hudson's journal, smudged and half frozen. It reads, "I am not lost. I am merely waiting to be found." You don't show it to anyone. You've hidden it between the pages of a Bible you no longer open. Some say his boat was later spotted by native hunters, drifting toward the western shore. Some claim bones were found on a barren island with no names. Others say he simply vanished, swallowed by the ice, as if the sea itself refused to give back what it had taken. There are maps now with lines he once drew, rivers and bays that still bear his name. You walk past them in libraries and museums, pretending not to flinch when the names whisper his memory. But the silence is always with you. Not the cold or the hunger or the fear, just the silence of a boat slipping into fog. You sit by the Times now, watching the gray river move like memory. No one around you knows what you did, what you saw, what you lost. But you carry it, not as punishment, but as a reminder. Because even if the world forgets Henry Hudson, you will never.
You wake up shivering, curled under a ragged blanket stuffed with straw. The wooden roof above your head groans under the weight of a spring snowfall. You blink your eyes open and realize the roof isn't a roof at all. It's the hull of a boat, turned upside down and half buried in sand. This isn't a cabin. It's a shelter made from desperation and driftwood. You're not a settler in the way they imagined in England. You're something else. You're a ghost with a shovel, digging in a dream that refuses to warm up. You were part of the Popham colony, the short-lived, nearly forgotten English settlement in what we now call Maine. It's the year 1607. Across the continent, a few hundred miles to the south, another colony called Jamestown has just begun. That one, you've heard, is barely hanging on. But here, in the icy north, things are even worse. You came with the dream of building England's next great city, a northern anchor in the New World, a place to rival Plymouth or Bristol. What you found was snow in September, wind that screamed like wolves, and a future carved out of frozen pine. You remember the voyage, August sun glittering on the water, your stomach turning with the waves and the excitement. The ship Gift of God was full of chatter and hope, the kind of hope only people who've never seen winter in North America can muster. You came ashore on a river called the Kennebec, not knowing if the trees staring back at you held welcome or warning. They say you built a fort with straight English lines, Fort St. George with bastions and storehouses and even a chapel. The place looked like a child's dream drawn with ruler and ink. Everything measured, everything ordered, everything doomed. Food ran short fast. The soil was sand. The forests whispered in unfamiliar accents. You tried to trade with the native Abenaki, but neither side truly understood the other. They brought furs and fish. You gave them cloth and iron. You wondered if they knew how cold the winter would be. Then the snow came, and came,
and came. You huddled in your makeshift hut as the cold crept into the seams of your boots. Firewood was wet, salted beef ran low. Men started talking to the trees. The river froze hard enough to walk across, but you barely had the strength. Frostbitten fingers fell off in the dark. You remember waking one night to the sound of someone screaming, not from pain, just screaming, as if the silence had gotten too loud inside his head. Historians still argue whether the Popham colony was abandoned because of the climate, poor planning, or simple cowardice. Some believe it might have survived if only they'd sent better leaders or more experienced carpenters. Others think the land itself rejected you. But you remember it wasn't just the cold that broke you. It was the absence of hope. You had a leader named George Popham, an old man with a fire in his eyes and England in his voice. He told you this would be the beginning of a new world, that God had led you here for a reason. He died within months. His breath turned to mist and never came back. The man who replaced him, Raleigh Gilbert, found out he'd inherited property back home and left, just like that. He packed up his ambition, boarded the ship, and went back to England, where the winters didn't kill you for blinking too slow. You wrote letters, desperate ones. You etched notes into birch bark. You carved dates into wood with a sailor's knife, just to prove you'd been here. Maybe, in some deep part of your mind, you knew the colony would be erased, that Jamestown would become the story while Popham became a footnote. So you documented everything. You remember drawing a map one night by candlelight, your fingers numb, tracing the river's curves with trembling ink. You labeled the storehouse, the blacksmith's forge, the chapel, the graves. So many graves. You wonder if anyone ever found that map, or if the snow swallowed it like everything else. You also remember a ship, a miracle really, a small vessel called the Virginia. It was built here, in your frozen little world, plank by plank, the first English ocean-going vessel constructed in the Americas. You watched its hull rise from the mud, the sawdust sticking to frostbitten beards, the joy in men's eyes when they saw something finished. It was small, but it floated. It carried your hopes for a future. Then it carried your friends away. When the supply ship finally returned from England the next summer, it found only ruins. Most of the settlers had packed what they could and sailed home. Others were dead. You stayed behind for a few more weeks, trying to decide if the dream was worth more than your breath. It wasn't. You left a carved sign on a tree that read, "We tried." Now, years later, when you hear people speak of the first English settlement, they mention Jamestown. They never say Popham. But you remember. You remember the boat roof, the graveyard beneath the pines, the sound of boots crunching frost at dawn. You keep a piece of that world in your pocket, a button, brass, worn smooth by salt and time. You found it buried under your old bunk before you left. You liked to think it was yours once, though it could have belonged to anyone. It doesn't matter. It's proof that someone lived there, that someone endured. Today, tourists visit Maine's rocky coast and eat lobster rolls by the water where your bones almost stayed. They don't know the ghosts beneath their feet, the forgotten fort, the journal pages left behind now turned to mulch beneath wild blueberries. But you know. And now so do we.
You wake before the sun, eyes sticky, body stiff. The air inside the fort smells of damp earth and boiled hides. You stretch slowly under your threadbare blanket, careful not to wake the others. They need rest, or whatever passes for it these days. Outside, the mist still clings to the palisade like a second skin, and the trees whisper things you can't quite translate. It is 1609 in Jamestown, Virginia, and you're barely holding on. You came here for adventure, for land, for the promise of carving out a life in the New World, where riches were supposed to lie under every rock, and the native people would greet you like distant cousins. Instead, you found rot, and rats, and a silence that burrows into your bones. The wind moans through the gaps in the wooden walls like a warning. But you're already here. Captain John Smith, your leader, your hard-headed, sharp-tongued commander, has left. His powder keg accident, or attempted assassination, depending on who you ask, forced him back to England. Without him, no one seems to know what to do. You've gone from barely surviving to unraveling. Now, every day is an exercise in waiting. Waiting for a supply ship. Waiting for the sickness to pass. Waiting to die. They call it the starving time. You remember what the colony looked like when you first arrived. Tall trees, wide rivers, promise. The natives, Powhatan they called themselves, were wary but not hostile. There was trading, corn, tobacco, feasts. Even Pocahontas, a curious young girl, danced and brought baskets of food. But now, the Powhatan are done with you. Your fences grew too high, your muskets barked too loud, your greed ran too deep. You haven't seen them in weeks. Not since they killed 2 men who wandered outside looking for mussels. Since then, no one leaves unless they want to be next. And inside the colony is decaying. There is no food, no animals, no roots left to pull. The fish are gone, the birds avoid you, even the dogs and cats have vanished. You know why. Rats are now delicacies. You saw a man catch one and roast it over an ash pile like it was a festival boar. You asked for a bite. He refused. You weren't offended. You would have done the same. And then there are the whispers. Quiet, curling whispers that hiss through the fort late at night. Stories of what happened to the apothecary's apprentice, of the bones found by the cookhouse, of hands stripped from flesh. Historians still argue whether the reports of cannibalism were true, but you were there. You saw the knife marks on old bones. You saw a man licking his fingers after stepping out of a hut with a too quiet companion. You felt your stomach turn, not from disgust, but from hunger. You tell yourself you'd never cross that line, but you're not so sure anymore. You walk the perimeter at dusk. Your musket is light in your arms because you haven't fired it in weeks. There's nothing to shoot, nothing to hunt. Just trees and eyes watching from the other side of the river. The palisade is sagging in places, and the watchtower leans slightly to one side, but you still go up. It's the only place you feel a little above it all. Up here, you can pretend this isn't a graveyard with a flag. You remember John Smith's voice barking orders, demanding discipline, rationing food with brutal fairness. You hated him then. Now you miss him. Without him, the council is a mess. Arguments about leadership and salt pork echo louder than prayers. A man named Percy tries to keep order, but even he looks haunted, like he's balancing on the edge of his own mind. You write in your journal every night. The ink is thin now, the quill shakes in your hand, but you keep writing. Sometimes you just list names of the dead. Sometimes you describe the weather. Once you wrote a recipe for barley bread, as if memory alone could conjure it back into being. You dream of England, of roast goose and warm cider, and a mother who still believes you'll return. But morning always comes, and with it the scraping coughs and sunken cheeks of the men you call brothers.
One morning, you wake to find a stranger at the gate. Not a native, not a settler, a child. A Powhatan boy, barefoot and calm, holding a basket. You open the gate a crack, enough to reach through. He places the basket down. Corn. Not much, but it feels like a miracle. You nod. He disappears into the mist without a word. No one knows why he came. No one sees him again. You ration the corn like gold dust. You feel the faintest flicker of hope. Then it snows again. There are now fewer than 60 of you left, out of 500. And more are dying. The graveyard outside the walls has expanded. You bury them fast now, sometimes 2 in a grave, sometimes without names. Then, one morning, the lookout shouts, "A ship! A real ship!" You don't believe it until you see the sails rising about the tree line like wings. You fall to your knees. You cry. You laugh. You forget for a moment how thin your arms have become. Supplies! Men! Orders from England! You are not forgotten. Jamestown survives. Barely. But it does. You don't talk about what happened that winter. You don't mention the girl who vanished or the cook with too many knives, but you keep your journal close. One day, you'll bury it under a rock by the river, just deep enough that someone might find it, just in case the official story forgets the truth. Because you were here. You endured. You kept breathing when breath itself seemed like betrayal. And though the wind still whispers through the palisade, tonight, for the first time in months, it doesn't sound like mourning. It sounds like mercy.
You're walking through heat that feels alive, not just hot, but sweltering in a way that melts thoughts out of your skull. Every breath is thick with humidity. Your shirt sticks to your back like a second skin, and your boots squish from the river crossing that soaked them 2 days ago. You're deep in the southeastern woodlands of what will one day be called the United States. But all you know right now is mud, heat, and endless walking. You are one of Hernando de Soto's men. Not by choice, not really. Sure, you volunteered, or maybe were pressed into service. Maybe you wanted gold or glory, or simply a better life than the one you left behind in Spain or Cuba. Whatever brought you here, it's far behind you now. What's in front of you is an unmarked trail winding through a swamp so loud with insect song that your ears ring even at night. De Soto was supposed to find a golden empire. That's what the king hoped. That's what the stories promised. He had crushed native kingdoms in Peru. He was wealthy, famous, and hungry for more. And he wasn't going to let a little thing like the vast, unfamiliar continent of North America slow him down. You've been marching for months, across Florida, into Georgia, then through what will later be called the Carolinas, Alabama, Mississippi, and beyond. Sometimes you march through forests, other times through grasslands that stretch wider than the eye can see. Every time you stop to build a camp, it rains, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Your tent leaks, your clothes stink, your powder is always damp. You stopped complaining weeks ago. Everyone did. The men who still whine don't last long. The native peoples are everywhere. They appear silently between trees. Sometimes they welcome you, sometimes they vanish. Sometimes they attack in the night and leave you counting bodies before breakfast. No one calls them primitive here, not after you've seen their cities, real cities, walled, layered, planned, clean roads and mounds that rise up like man-made hills. The people wear feathers, shells, beads. They speak languages you don't understand, but the look in their eyes is always the same.
Suspicion mixed with curiosity, like they're watching to see what kind of monster you'll become. At one such city, a place the chroniclers will call Mabilla, things go horribly wrong. You're promised supplies and welcome, then the gates close. A battle erupts. Smoke rises so fast you can't see. Screams echo. You lose friends. You lose weapons. The whole city becomes a firestorm. When it's over, the ground is littered with bodies, your own and theirs. You are too tired to feel anything, too numb to ask why. De Soto insists the next city will be different. He says he has a plan. He always says that. Historians still argue whether De Soto believed his own legends or was just bluffing long enough to keep the expedition moving. You can't tell. His face doesn't change. Not after the battles, not after the betrayals, not even after the sickness begins. The men start to die slowly now, not from wounds, not from arrows, but from the land itself, from water that hides fevers, from insects that carry death on their legs, from exhaustion that crawls down into your bones and refuses to leave. You bury them by torchlight, shallow graves in shallow soil. Some you barely know, others were your friends. You stop remembering names. Then you reach a river, a real river, so wide it looks like the sea. You've seen rivers before, but never like this. The water flows thick and brown, stretching from horizon to horizon. De Soto calls it the Rio del Espíritu Santo. Later, others will call it the Mississippi. Right now, it is just another obstacle. You build rafts. Some sink, some float. You lose a mule. You almost lose a man. But you cross. You reach the other side. And then De Soto gets worse. He starts coughing up blood. He can't ride. He can't lead. For the first time, the man who seemed carved from granite is breaking down. You see fear in the eyes of the captains. One night, while the others sleep, he calls a priest. You don't know what is said, but the next day, he is dead. No fanfare, no trumpets, just gone. You wrap his body in cloth, weigh it with stones. In the middle of the night, you carry it to the river. You slip it beneath the water, the ripples vanish quickly, and with them, the last real sense of direction your expedition had. You don't even carve a cross, no marker, just water. It's supposed to be a secret. You're not supposed to tell the natives. They respect power. If they know your leader is gone, they may strike. So you pretend. You say he's sick. You say he's praying. You hold empty meetings in front of his tent. The new leaders argue. Some want to return east. Others say head west. Some suggest sailing downriver, building ships from what's left of your strength and hopes. You're not sure which plan sounds least fatal. In the meantime, you move again. The weather turns colder. The wind bites at your cheeks. You trade what little you have for food. Sometimes you steal, sometimes you beg. The natives are tired of your presence. They see what you've done. Burned villages, desecrated mounds, trampled fields. They want you gone. One night, a man you barely know hands you a chunk of river fish, still warm. You nod. It's the closest thing to friendship you had in weeks. You chew slowly, let the taste fill your mouth, then sleep under a log, your journal tucked into your coat, the only part of you not covered in mud. You write by lantern light. Today we buried De Soto. We are drifting. The land does not want us. Still, we press on. Tomorrow you will wake to frost. You'll tighten your boots. You'll step into another nameless day. You don't know what you'll find. Probably more hunger. Maybe an end. Or maybe, just maybe, a boat. A way back to somewhere that doesn't chew up your soul with every step. But for tonight, the river is quiet. The stars peek through the clouds, And though you can't see De Soto anymore, you still feel him under the water, drifting west with the current, chasing gold he never found.
You don't know exactly when you stopped thinking of the New World as temporary. Maybe it was after your boots wore through and you tied strips of bark around your feet. Or maybe it was when you ate roasted acorns for 5 days straight and told yourself they were almonds. Either way, the idea of returning home has drifted so far from your mind, it's become a story you once heard from someone else. You're not conquering anything anymore. You're surviving. Just like the natives you once feared, you've become part of the wilderness. But the mapmakers will one day owe their careers to men like you. You're still with the remnants of De Soto's company, wandering west and south through Louisiana and Texas, dragging what little remains of European ambition behind you. There's no gold, no crown, no glory, just scribbled maps, dirty clothes, and a daily negotiation with death. You're in territory so far from anything familiar that you've stopped naming it. The stars are your only compass now, and even they seem to spin in ways they didn't back home. The leaders argue constantly. Luis de Moscoso has taken charge since De Soto's river burial. He wants to turn west, to try and reach Mexico by land. He says it's closer than retracing your steps back to Florida. Historians still debate whether that was a tactical move or a final gamble to escape inevitable ruin. You have no strong opinion. You've stopped hoping and started obeying. For months, you follow strange rivers that loop like snakes, march past dry hills with cracked earth, sleep beneath trees that look more like sculptures than plants. At one village, the people offer roasted dogs. You eat in silence. You don't even flinch. Hunger has a way of making your pride very negotiable. At another, a woman gives you dried fruit in a folded leaf. You thank her in broken words, and she nods. Her child hides behind her legs, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. You wonder what you look like to them. Armor half rusted, beard wild, voice rasping from thirst. Less man than ghost. You write it down in your journal. They gave us figs. We gave them fear. Eventually, the decision is made to turn south instead. Find the Gulf, build boats, try the sea. No one has much strength left, but the idea of floating instead of walking is too tempting to resist. You begin the long, miserable process of turning trees into ships. With blunt axes and prayers, you carve planks, soak bark, braid vines. The ships are crude and leaky, but they float. Barely. It takes weeks to prepare. During that time, more men die. Fever, snakebite, quiet despair. One man walks off into the woods one morning and never returns. Another tries to swim across a creek and disappears mid-stroke. His hat floats back to shore, the only thing recovered. At last, the ships are ready. You push off at dawn, the fog rolling like soft fabric across the riverbanks. You sit in silence with 7 others, holding your breath every time the boat creaks. The current is slow at first, then quickens. You pass strange cliffs, unfamiliar birds, occasional patches of smoke from faraway fires. The land is receding. It feels unreal, dreamlike. Then you see it, the Gulf. It's not glorious. There are no fanfares, no angels singing. Just an endless stretch of gray-blue water, rough waves, and the smell of salt that stings your nose. But it's freedom, it's possibility, and it's terrifying. You sail west along the coast, hoping to reach a Spanish outpost. Days blend together. The boats spring leaks daily. You bail water with your hands. Fish swim close to the hole, as if taunting you. One night, a storm rolls in with no warning. Lightning flashes so close it blinds you. The thunder slams into your chest like a drum. A man is struck mid-prayer. You bury him at sea the next morning, wrapped in a wet cloak. Your supplies are almost gone.
The water is nearly undrinkable. Your skin is blistered from sun and salt. But then, a miracle. You see sails, a Spanish ship, real, not imagined, not hoped for. You scream, you wave, you stand despite the rocking of the boat. They see you. They come. You're pulled aboard by sailors who look fat, clean, and impossibly calm. They feed you something warm and soft. You eat without tasting. You're too exhausted to cry. You just sit there, holding your bowl, trying to remember how to be human again. In the days that follow, you try to explain where you've been, what you've seen, the cities, the rivers, the endless miles of wild land. Some believe you, some don't. They ask where Soto is buried. You shrug. You don't give them an answer. Some things are better left with the river. They offer to take you to Mexico City. You nod. Anything that isn't a swamp sounds like paradise. You drift into sleep as the sails fill with wind, and the coast of your suffering fades behind you, like a memory you're not sure was real. Later, your journals are passed from hand to hand. They're copied, translated, edited. Some parts are believed, some are dismissed as fantasy. But they keep showing up in libraries, academies, and museums. People write books about your expedition. They draw maps from your notes. They debate whether you were brave or foolish, noble or savage, hero or villain. You read none of it. You're too busy trying to remember what your own voice sounded like before the wilderness stole it. And even now, years later, when the food is rich and the bed is soft, you sometimes wake in the night with the smell of pine needles in your nose and the sound of drums echoing from a land that never wanted you. You sit up, wipe your face, and whisper one word: survived. You wake to a groaning wind and the smell of frozen earth. It's 1607, and you're not in Jamestown or Plymouth. You're in the frostbitten bones of a forgotten dream, Popham colony, tucked into the wilds of what would one day be Maine. The trees grown with snow, the river glitters with ice, and you're wrapped in damp wool, teeth chattering, wondering how many more will die this week. Spoiler, it'll be 3. You'll help bury them just before dawn. Most Americans don't even know this colony existed. Historians still argue whether it should count as a true attempt at colonization or just an extended camping trip gone wrong. But you were here. You laid the beams, you raised the chapel walls, and perhaps most importantly, you helped build the very first English ocean-going ship in the New World, the Virginia. That alone should have earned your name a line in the textbooks, but it didn't. So tonight, we'll remember for you. Your journey began on a stiff, gray morning aboard the Gift of God, one of 2 ships that carried a hopeful band of about 120 English settlers across the cold Atlantic. Led by George Popham and Raleigh Gilbert, you believed in commerce, timber, and the promise of a gentler new world, at least compared to the swampy disaster you'd heard whispers of in Virginia. And for a moment, everything looked perfect. You landed at the mouth of the Kennebec River. There was plenty of fresh water, towering pine trees, and deep natural harbors. You built a fort with a neat perimeter. You erected houses, a storehouse, a blacksmith's forge. You even had a chapel with a pulpit carved by hand and floors swept daily with bundled branches. Most incredibly, you and a handful of master shipwrights began constructing a vessel, the Virginia, from local wood, your only blueprints etched into your memory, and the side of a barrel. But paradise didn't last. The cold came early that year. By October, ice slicked your tools before dawn. Wolves crept closer at night, their howls fraying nerves already worn thin. The Abenaki tribes, once cautiously friendly, grew distant. Rumors spread that a neighboring sachem had been insulted by one of your men. You couldn't blame him. Some of the younger boys spoke without thinking, treated everyone who didn't wear shoes like a child. You tried to smooth things over with traded fish hooks and cloth, but the damage was done. Inside the colony walls, you dealt with worse: hunger, frostbite, dysentery. George Popham, your governor, kept diaries that painted a bright picture, but even he wasn't immune to the creeping dread. His death came in February, wrapped in wool and prayer. You dug his grave in frozen soil, hands blistered and boots wet with meltwater. The man who had spoken of empire was now just another mound of snow. Raleigh Gilbert, next in line, was a bolder man. He urged everyone to press forward, said spring would change everything. But his words rang hollow. Supplies from England were months overdue. The fish traps froze solid. A windstorm tore down part of the storehouse roof. And you, exhausted, coughing, sleepless, kept hammering nails into the hull of the Virginia because the alternative was sitting still and letting the cold eat you up. Still, there were moments. You remember one night when a boy sang an English tune by the fire, and everyone fell silent, just listening. For a moment, it was warm again, familiar. You remember when the forge finally sparked to life after 3 failed attempts, and you danced like a fool, covered in soot. You remember the day the Virginia slid into the icy water, the men cheering like madmen, their voices echoing through the bare pines. That ship, your ship, was 50 feet long, clinker built, with sails stitched from canvas hauled across the Atlantic. You carved its wheel, you sanded its hull, you wept when it didn't sink. But the triumph was short-lived. With Popham dead and morale crumbling, Gilbert learned that his elder brother had died back in England. As heir, he had to return, and once he made that decision, the colony unraveled like a frayed rope. No new supplies, no new settlers, no clear leader. In the spring, with snow finally melting and river ice breaking apart, a decision was made. Leave. Pack what you could, abandon what you couldn't. Let the forest reclaim the rest. You boarded the Virginia and sailed south, past Cape Cod, past Jamestown, past all the places people would remember. You left behind cabins, a forge, graves, and the ghost of what might have been. And yet, it wasn't for nothing. The Virginia would go on to make another Atlantic crossing, ferrying settlers and news between continents. It became a symbol, quiet, often ignored, of what English hands could create in a harsh land. The skills you honed would be passed on. The trees you felled made way for others. You never returned, but others did. And this cold corner of the world, it would become a cradle of shipbuilding might by the next century. Historians may still debate whether Popham was a failure, whether it should be remembered alongside Jamestown or Roanoke, but you don't need their agreement. You lived it. You walked through snow taller than a man, lit fires with your last dry match, buried leaders and friends with frozen hands, and still, you built something. So now, as the fire crackles low and the chill of the past starts to fade from your mind, remember, forgotten does not mean unworthy. The ship you built sailed, the chapel you prayed in echoed with hope, and you, silent, scarred, overlooked, are part of the foundation of a nation, and you still remember the sound of the Virginia's hull sliding into the water like a hymn to survival.
You wake with sand in your mouth and the sun already high over the red mesas. The dust clings to your skin, thick with memory. It is 1680, and you are a young member of the Pueblo peoples, one of the many indigenous tribes living along the Rio Grande and what the Spaniards now call New Mexico. But today, this land does not belong to Spain. Today, it belongs to you. For nearly a century, you've lived under a shadow. Your father still whispers the old prayers at night, even though he was whipped for them as a boy. Your mother plants corn in the Spanish style now, but when she thinks no one is watching, she draws sacred signs in the dirt. You grew up hearing 2 languages and 2 truths. One said, obey the priests. The other said, remember who you are. The Spanish had come with flags, swords, and crosses. They built missions and renamed your villages. They baptized you, demanded tribute, banned your dances, and punished your gods. They said the old ways were evil. You weren't even allowed to gather for your ceremonies. The kivas, those sacred underground chambers, fell silent or were filled with smoke and fear. Historians still argue whether forced labor or the erasure of culture was the greater wound. But you feel the answer in your bones. It was both. You know the cruelty personally. You remember when your uncle was flogged for sorcery. His only crime was healing a sick child with herbs. You remember when the priests tore down your shrine and told you the true God lived in a gold cup behind an altar you couldn't touch. You remember the silence in your village after another public hanging. Then came Popham, a Tela man from Okeowinge, formerly San Juan Pueblo. Once imprisoned by the Spanish, he emerged changed. He did not shout. He whispered. He moved through the pueblos like a shadow with purpose, calling on the old spirits, invoking ancient names, lighting a fire in the hearts of elders and youth alike. You saw him once, eyes dark, hands painted red with ochre, silent as a storm waiting to break. And then came the chords, knotted strings, passed from pueblo to pueblo. Each knot counted down the days, 12, 11, 10. You tied your own when the time came, and you prayed not just to the old gods, but to the wind, to the land, to your ancestors, that they would rise with you. August 10th. At dawn you rise with the others, armed with bows, spears, and memory. The first target is the church. You watch as the doors are broken, the altar overturned. The friar screams, then goes quiet. The crosses burn. A century of fear ignites in a single morning. Rebellion sweeps across more than 24 pueblos. Missions fall like dominoes. The Spanish don't see it coming. In Santa Fe, panic. The governor barricades himself inside the palace. Pueblo warriors surround it. In the heat and smoke, you hear chants that haven't been sung aloud in decades. You taste freedom in the ash. Your people take back the land, the sky, the names. By nightfall, more than 400 Spaniards are dead. Survivors flee south, stumbling into the desert toward El Paso. You hear that some priests tried to baptize even as they died. You feel no pity. For once, the fear is theirs. The aftermath is complicated. Popham emerges as the spiritual and political leader of the rebellion. He demands a total purge of Spanish influence. All Christian symbols are destroyed. Spanish crops are abandoned. Even horses are reclassified, not gifts of empire, but servants of the people. You are told to forget every Spanish word. But language doesn't vanish so easily. Some of the younger children only know the Christian names. Still, for 12 years the Spanish do not return. You live in a fragile peace. You rebuild the kivas. You dance without punishment. You sing to the sun. And yet, tensions rise between pueblos. Some argue over land, over water, over Popey's authority. Factions form. Drought begins to bite at your crops. Bison herds grow thin. The spirits are honored again, but the earth does not easily forgive. In 1692, the Spanish return, not with fire and sword at first, but with olive branches and the language of forgiveness. Diego de Vargas, new governor of New Mexico, offers pardon in exchange for allegiance. Some accept. Some resist. Others flee to mesas or deserts, hoping the invaders will tire and leave. But they don't. Over the next few years, New Mexico is retaken, pueblo by pueblo. Violence returns. Churches are rebuilt. But so is resistance. Even today, historians disagree whether the Spanish conquered or merely coexisted. The truth is blurrier. You know. You lived the middle. You age in this twilight. The children born after the revolt call it a myth. They weren't there when you painted your face in clay and faced the friars. They didn't hear the chants rise like thunder.
But sometimes during festival days, when the dancers spin and the drums shake the earth, you see the old fire in their eyes, and you smile. Because no matter what happens, no matter how many statues are erected, no matter how many roads are named for governors, you know this truth. For 12 years, your people reclaimed a world that had nearly been erased. Not as savages, not as shadows, but as memory made flesh. You remember the chords, the knots, the silence before the storm. You remember Popé's final walk across the plaza, silent, proud, and vanishing into history like the dusk. And now, as your body rests on a woven mat, the clay walls around you cool from the setting sun, you close your eyes and see not the conquerors, not the priests, not even the flames. You see the moment when the people danced free again, if only for a season. You whisper their names. You whisper yours. And the earth, somewhere deep beneath you, whispers back.
You tighten your wool blanket against the Missouri chill and look out over the prairie that seems to stretch forever. The campfire crackles, but it doesn't warm you the way it should. You are part of something called the Corps of Discovery. And if that sounds impressive, it's because Thomas Jefferson said it should be. But right now, with frost in your boots and buffalo grease in your hair, it feels more like a really cold, really long mistake. It's 1804. You signed up because they said it was about glory, adventure, mapping the West, finding the Northwest Passage. Spoiler alert, there is no Northwest Passage. But there are bears that don't run away when you yell, and there are rivers that pretend to go somewhere useful until you're 3 weeks upstream and still stuck. You've eaten your leather belts more than once. And the mosquitoes? The size of grapes and twice as mean. Captain Meriwether Lewis is the quiet one, thoughtful, a little too serious. You've seen him spend hours drawing a plant and then trip over a log because he forgot to watch his feet. William Clark is louder, steadier. He sketches maps like he's trying to redraw the entire continent from memory. Together, they lead this strange band of men, soldiers, French-Canadian traders, and a dog named Seaman who acts like he owns the whole expedition. Then there's Sacagawea. She's unlike anyone else. A Shoshone woman, barely more than a girl really, with a baby on her back and a gaze that cuts through blizzards. She doesn't speak much, but when she does, people listen. Especially Lewis and Clark. She knows this land in ways maps can't teach. She finds edible roots, guides you through mountain passes, and most importantly, keeps some of the tribes from spearing you on sight. Historians still argue whether she was a guide or a symbol, a translator or a hostage. The truth, you think, is yes, she was all of those things, and more. Without her, you'd still be stuck near the Mandan villages, arguing over whether bison liver is technically food. You cross rivers so wide they look like oceans. You climb hills that pretend they're not mountains until you're halfway up and your lungs are staging a protest. One day, you meet grizzly bears for the first time. They don't flinch when shot. You barely escape. Later, when Lewis writes about them in his journal, he calls them remarkably tenacious of life. You call them the reason I no longer sleep by the riverbank. Every night the sky is full of stars, and the air smells of sage and whatever you're boiling for dinner, usually roots, dried fish, or something that used to be an animal. You've learned to sleep with one eye open and to never ever trust the weather. The team logs everything. Birds, fish, trees, even the shapes of clouds. Clark draws maps obsessively. Lewis names plants like he's inventing a new language.
Sometimes you wonder if anyone will ever read these journals or if they'll just rot in some archive back east while you're here getting frostbite. Still, something changes in you. You realize this isn't just about exploration. It's about being remade. The West does that. It wears away your old habits, replaces them with instincts. You stop flinching at howls in the dark. You learn which berries won't kill you. You read the wind. You remember one night, the night you reached the Continental Divide. It should have been glorious. It should have been the top of the world. But what you saw wasn't a downward slope to the Pacific. It was more mountains, more rivers, more everything. The land didn't care about your goals. Still, you kept going. By late 1805, the landscape begins to change. Pines thin out. You hear gulls, smell salt. Your boots are shredded. Your journal is a soggy mess. But one morning, you see it, the Pacific Ocean, or at least the mouth of the Columbia River, thrashing its way into the sea like it's been waiting to meet you. Some men cheer, others cry. You just sit down and breathe for the first time in weeks. You build Fort Clotso and spend the winter there. It rains every day. Clothes never dry. Spirits fray. Sacagawa's baby, now nearly walking, is the only one who seems to enjoy the mud. Lewis writes detailed notes on moss. Clark sketches whales. You count how many times you've eaten boiled elk and decide never to do it again once you return home. The journey back in 1806 is faster. You know the land now, or at least it knows you. You revisit tribes, cross familiar rivers, and bury your dead where the earth can keep them. The journals grow thicker, the maps more precise. By the time you return to St. Louis, you're thinner, tougher, and haunted. People cheer when you arrive, call you heroes, offer you medals, parades, questions. But they weren't there when Sacagawea stood between you and death. They didn't face the grizzly bears, or the gnawing hunger, or the endless wind that could strip the thoughts from your skull. You don't feel like a hero. You feel like someone who saw too much. And yet, at night, when the crowd quiets and the fire dies down, you look up at the stars and remember a moment, maybe near the Bitterroots or on the banks of the Missouri, when everything was quiet and you were more alive than you ever thought possible. You whisper a thank you to the land, to the wind, to the guide with the infant on her back and the fire in her step. And then you sleep, not as a soldier or explorer, but as someone who walked the edge of the world and made it back.
Your breath fogs in front of your face, curling in the brutal air like a ghost that's ready to abandon ship. You tighten the scarf around your cracked lips, though it's hardly more than a rag. Snow crunches underfoot, but that satisfying sound has long since lost its charm. Everything is cold, including your hopes. You're somewhere in the unforgiving expanse of what Pike says might be the Red River. But it isn't. It's not even close. And now your boots are soaked, your stomach is hollow, and the mountains ahead promise nothing but more suffering. The year is 1806, and you're riding with Lieutenant Zebulon Pike on what was supposed to be a relatively tidy mission. Explore the southern reaches of the Louisiana Territory, locate the Red River, establish friendly terms with native tribes, and return with neat notes and dashing stories. But let's just say the execution has gone off script. The terrain doesn't care about your maps. The wind doesn't care about your flag. And the Spanish, well, they're about to care way too much.
You remember when Pike first caught sight of the snowy peaks now known as the Rocky Mountains? His eyes lit up like he was staring at the gates of Eden. "We must reach them," he said. You should have said no thank you, but you followed. Everyone did, because Pike, for all his rigid discipline and dry speeches, has a pull about him. He believes in something. Discovery. Destiny, even when it's snowing sideways and your fingers are blackening from frostbite. You try to scale those mountains. The going is slow. The weather is brutal. At one point, you're forced to butcher a horse for food, not because you want to, but because the only alternative is starvation. The men grow quieter. Less laughter, more coughing. You lose track of dates. You build a crude stockade, decide what you still think is the Red River, even though the direction of its flow says otherwise. It's actually the Rio Grande. Historians still debate whether Pike wandered into Spanish territory on purpose. Some say he was doing a bit of covert reconnaissance for the U.S. government. After all, the Spanish settlements down here were ripe with strategic interest. Others insist it was just a cartographic disaster, a simple case of mistaking one river for another in the maze of the Southwest. Either way, you're soon surrounded by Spanish soldiers, and your mission turns into an arrest record. You're taken to Santa Fe, and then far south into the heart of New Spain, all the way to Chihuahua. It's a strange ride. The landscape shifts from icy cliffs to sun-drenched valleys. You pass missions with thick adobe walls and bells that echo across the canyons. Children peer from doorways. Guards eye you warily. Your rations are better here, but the air is laced with the knowledge that you're far from home and that you crossed a line drawn in blood and language. The Spanish don't torture you. They don't even treat you cruelly. Pike is interrogated, but treated with a measure of respect. Maybe it's his bearing, or maybe it's the fact that Spain and the U.S. aren't quite at war, at least not officially. He makes observations, scribbles in his journal, memorizes road systems and trade routes. You realize he's still mapping even while under arrest. His curiosity is tireless and his poker face unshakable. One evening, you hear him say to another officer, "Knowledge is a form of conquest." You wonder if that's what this entire journey has been about. Not just discovering new places, but understanding them enough to eventually control them. You spend months in New Spain. Some men grow sick, others adapt. You trade English for broken Spanish and gestures. You watch the uneasy dance between empire and resistance, between power and custom. You see how the land shifts under its conquerors, how the sun doesn't care who draws the borders. Eventually, after much diplomatic back and forth, the Spanish release you. It's May 1807. The conditions are leave and don't come back. You're marched to the border near Natchitoches, Louisiana, and dumped back into American territory with the clothes on your back and tales no one's quite ready to hear. When you return, people don't know what to make of Pike's reports. You didn't find gold, you didn't reach the Pacific, you got arrested, for heaven's sakes. But his notes are dense, observant, unsettling. They describe everything from military outposts to agricultural yields. They reveal a geography that Washington barely knew existed. Quietly, Pike's journals circulate among political and military minds. Years later, those very maps and insights will help inform American ambitions during the Mexican-American War. Pike, in a strange twist, becomes a foundational figure not for what he conquered, but for what he understood before anyone else bothered to look. And you you return to ordinary life, changed in ways you can't describe. Sometimes you dream of the riverbanks near Santa Fe, of the stars over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. You remember eating bark and weeping silently as snow piled on your bedroll. You remember the creak of wooden wheels on the long march back to nowhere. You remember Pike, calm, exacting, driven. And you wonder if he was cold too, or if fire burned under that uniform the whole time. One night, you stand alone on your porch, staring west. The horizon seems quieter now, but no less mysterious. You close your eyes, and for just a moment, you smell cedar smoke, feel the altitude in your lungs, and hear the scratch of a journal being written beside a dying fire. And for the first time in years, you smile.
You're awake before the sun, your breath thick in the mountain air, curled up inside a worn blanket that barely wards off the cold. The Sierra Nevada range looms around you, snowbound and silent. John Charles Frémont is already up, scribbling in his journal by the flickering light of a campfire that struggles to stay alive in the wind. You can hear the dull scraping of his pencil, and you wonder if he's writing about the stars again, or the fact that some of your mules have frozen stiff overnight. It's December 1846, and what started as a confident expedition into the West has turned into a half-frozen gamble with nature. Frémont, the man they called the Pathfinder, led you this far across the Great Basin, through jagged ridges, along salt plains that crunched like scorched bones underfoot. He's not a large man, but there's an intensity to him that draws people in, makes them believe in the impossible. You've believed it too, at least until your hands began to blister and crack, and your canteen held more ice than water. This third expedition, his most ambitious yet, was meant to open a new overland route to California. The plan was bold, even beautiful, to cross the Rockies and Sierras before winter set in. But Frémont miscalculated. You all did. Snow hit early and hit hard. Soon, the passes closed behind you. Then came the days of wandering, hungry days, lost days, days where maps meant little and instinct less. Kit Carson, your tireless scout, now spends hours staring into the white void ahead, trying to find anything resembling a trail. His face is leathery from wind and sun, but his eyes sharp, restless, reveal the pressure he's under. Carson's knowledge has saved you time and again, but even he seems uncertain now. "We're high up," he muttered yesterday. "Too high. Should have turned south sooner." You know what he means. These mountains are death if you get stuck in them. One evening, a mule collapses from exhaustion and cold. There's a terrible silence before Frémont orders it butchered. Nobody protests. You've gone days on boiled leather, bitter roots, melted snow. Even mule meat sounds like a feast. The fat sizzles in the pan and smells like salvation. You eat quickly, hands shaking. No one speaks. What's there to say? Historians still argue whether Frémont's decision to continue through the mountains was an act of bravery or hubris. Some believe he wanted to stage a dramatic triumph, to arrive in California like a hero of legend. Others say he simply refused to back down, even when the snow thickened and the path vanished. Either way, men suffered for that ambition. Some died. Frostbite claimed toes and fingers. The mountains became a cemetery of dreams. Frémont never stopped writing. Even when his ink froze, he etched observations with a blade into bark.
He documented geological formations, wildlife patterns, the condition of the men. His journals weren't just for science. They were theater. He knew they'd be read in Washington. He knew that narrative shaped memory. By January, you're descending, finally escaping the alpine trap that nearly consumed you. The descent is no victory march. It's a crawl. When you reach lower ground, you collapse. Your face is hollow, your eyes sunken, your beard matted with ice. But you're alive. Frémont, though thinner, still glows with energy. As the group recovers, he writes feverishly. His wife, Jessie Benton Frémont, daughter of powerful Senator Thomas Hart Benton, will soon polish and publish his account, transforming it into a bestseller. America will read of noble struggle and brave endurance. They won't smell the mule fat or hear the cries in the night. Frémont becomes a national celebrity. His reports stir imaginations, inspire settlers, and help validate manifest destiny. He's promoted, feted, lionized. In 1856, he even becomes the first Republican candidate for president. He doesn't win, but the path he blazed is now part of the American psyche. The West is no longer a vague idea. It's a prize to be chased. You remain in the background. You're just one of the many who followed him, who hauled supplies, who froze, who nearly starved. But part of you understands the pull. The West changed you. Its silence carved a space in your soul, a longing for the wild, the unknown. There are moments you still remember, the crunch of snow underfoot as stars wheeled above, the smell of pine smoke, the way Frémont stood silhouetted against the ridge, coat billowing like a flag. You remember the hush that fell over the camp when Carson pointed out a hidden trail. You remember the day you found a frozen stream and knelt beside it, drinking like an animal, crying without meaning to. One night, years later, you sit on your porch in Missouri, holding the old journal you kept through the ordeal. Its pages are brittle, but they whisper stories only you and the mountains know. You close it gently, your fingers still scarred from that winter. Then, lifting your eyes to the setting sun, you almost expect to see Frémont there again, striding ahead, refusing to stop, forever sketching his name into the frontier's frozen skin.
You wake up surrounded by rocks, not just any rocks, strata folded like dough, speckled with glittering veins of quartz, some so ancient they seem to hum with buried time. The sun has barely cleared the ridgeline, but Clarence King is already scrambling up a slope, notebook in one hand, rock hammer in the other. He's grinning, as usual. His energy, like the Sierra Nevada itself, feels relentless. You're part of the 1860s Geological Survey, a small band of rugged scientists tasked with mapping the land from California to Wyoming. It's called the 40th Parallel Survey, and it might sound tame compared to earlier explorations, but don't be fooled. This is still the Wild West. Avalanches, bandits, bears, and dehydration are all in play. And Clarence King, he's the ideal guide for such chaos. Harvard-trained, poetic, fearless, and occasionally reckless. You trudge behind him as he points out ancient granite batholiths and fossilized seabeds now perched 10,000 feet in the air. He talks geology like a preacher, his voice animated, his eyes gleaming. You're not sure whether he's describing sediment layers or reading Shakespeare, but somehow it makes sense. The earth, he insists, is a storyteller. You just have to learn its language. Historians still debate whether King's expedition was more scientific or theatrical.
He carefully documented formations, pioneered surveying techniques, and mapped vast swaths of territory that would shape U.S. expansion. But he also posed for photographs on cliffs, wrote sweeping narratives for Eastern audiences, and once climbed what he thought was Mount Whitney, only to discover later it was a nearby peak. He laughed off the mistake and published it anyway. The real Mount Whitney would have to wait. But the strangest chapter of Clarence King's life doesn't take place in the mountains. It happens in the city. Years later, after becoming the first director of the United States Geological Survey, yes, the first, he leads a double life that even dime novels wouldn't dare print. While overseeing national science policy by day, he lives by night as James Todd, a black Pullman porter, husband, and father in New York. You blink at this, thinking maybe you misunderstood, but it's real. King, blue-eyed and white, passed as a black man to marry Ada Copeland, a former slave from Georgia. She never knew his true identity until after his death. Scholars still argue whether this was an act of love, guilt, rebellion, or all three. No one knows for sure. King left behind few clues. But back in the 1860s, the Clarence King you know is all rock and ink and enthusiasm. He's also about to become famous for something outrageous, uncovering the greatest mining scam in American history. It starts when whispers of a diamond field reach King's ears. A pair of prospectors claim they've discovered a site in the Western Territories where diamonds, rubies, and sapphires lie scattered like pebbles. Investors, including some of the biggest banking names, are pouring money into what might be the next big boom. But something smells off to King. You follow him into the desert where he studies the soil, examines the gem field, and after hours of sifting through sand and scribbling in his field book, declares the whole thing a fraud. The diamonds were salted, planted with gems bought overseas. It's a hoax of dazzling proportions, one that nearly fooled the U.S. Treasury. King exposes it just in time. The newspapers go wild. His fame explodes. Still, King never brags. Not in the way you'd expect. He downplays the moment, deflects praise, and goes back to measuring strata and chasing glaciers. But those who were there remember, this quiet cerebral geologist saved the nation millions with nothing but logic, dust, and integrity. One of your most vivid memories is watching him balance atop a narrow granite ledge, notebook tucked into his belt, sketching the curve of a canyon with charcoal. The earth, he murmurs, is a cathedral built from time. Another time, deep in the Nevada range, he finds a fossilized fern and treats it like a sacred relic. He shows it to you by firelight, explaining how it lived before the dinosaurs, when this whole land was underwater. You nod, but secretly you're still just trying to keep your socks dry and your rations from molding. You travel by rail, mule, and boot leather. You camp in alpine meadows and alkali flats. You dodge thunderstorms and court heat stroke. And all the while, King records. His notes become maps. His sketches become evidence. His writing, lyrical, precise, shapes how the East sees the West. And yet, years later, King Clarence dies broke. He never tells his children his real name. Ada, his wife, spends decades trying to claim the pension due to her husband, unaware that the man she loved was someone the government doesn't acknowledge under the name he gave her. It's a tragedy wrapped in mystery, and it leaves you wondering if King ever truly belonged anywhere. But when you remember him, you remember the laughter echoing off a granite wall, or the quiet awe in his voice as he named a nameless ridge. You remember how he looked at stone the way some people look at stars. And somewhere in the quiet of your own old age, long after the expeditions have faded into yellowed pages and museum displays, you whisper a truth King once muttered while staring at a volcanic plateau. History is just geology with emotions. You still don't know what he meant, but it stays with you.
You're not sure who shouted first,
but the voice ricochets off canyon walls like a warning. Rocks ahead! You brace yourself in the narrow wooden boat as the Colorado River boils around boulders, snarling and furious. The oars groan, the prow dips, and for a moment, just one terrifying moment, you feel weightless. Then comes the splash, the slam, and the cold. Welcome to the heart of the Grand Canyon, summer of 1869. You're riding with Major John Wesley Powell, the one-armed Civil War veteran who somehow convinced the U.S. government and 9 other men that descending the untamed Colorado River in wooden boats was a good idea. You clutch the gunwale with wet, numb fingers and try not to think about how many skeletons may lie under the water. Powell sits near the stern of your craft, his broad-brimmed hat low, his jaw clenched. He's calm, even as the rapids rise like angry gods. He lost his right arm at Shiloh, but that hasn't stopped him from rowing, climbing, or scribbling notes in a waterproof notebook he made himself. His presence steadies you. Sort of. You've been on the river for weeks now, beginning near Green River Station in Wyoming. You've run Cataract Canyon, traversed Desolation Canyon, and now you're carving your way through the final mystery of the American West. This is territory uncharted by any white man and very nearly unconquered by any man, period. The boats are clumsy things, specially built for the journey. Oak frames, watertight compartments, and space for only the barest rations, coffee, flour, dried fruit, and bacon if you're lucky. You sleep on beaches, clamber up cliffs to measure geological strata, and spend most days soaking wet. Historians still argue whether Powell's real mission was science, spectacle, or sheer madness. He called it an exploration of geography, but the press called it suicide. You just call it loud, wet, and exhausting. You lose 2 boats early on, smashed to splinters against canyon walls. Supplies are lost. A man nearly drowns trying to save a barometer. Another claims the river is haunted by voices. No one laughs. You hear them too. And yet, between the chaos, the beauty is arresting. Waterfalls burst from stone, sending rainbows arcing over your camp. Eagles drift overhead, riding thermals with effortless grace. In a narrow slot canyon, you find ancient petroglyphs. Powell pauses for a long time, his fingers tracing the carvings. "Others were here long before us," he whispers. Your clothes rot, your boots wear through, you eat less and less. Fear becomes a constant companion. Will the next rapid kill you? Will you starve before you emerge? The river offers no clues, only thunder and foam. Then comes the moment none of you forget. 3 men, Dunn and the Howland brothers, decide to leave. The river, they say, is too dangerous. They climb out of the canyon, disappearing over the rim with solemn nods and a prayer. The next day, you reach calmer water. Days later, Powell leads the survivors out of the canyon. You never see the 3 deserters again. Later, you learn they were likely killed by Shivwits natives who mistook them for hostiles. Or maybe it was outlaws. Historians still debate that part. Either way, they didn't make it. And you did. Powell's journey becomes legend. He returns to the East, hailed as a hero. His report becomes a bestseller. Congress funds a second expedition, and Powell later becomes head of the U.S. Geological Survey, the very agency Clarence King helped establish. But the glory, as always, is only part of the story. You remember the blisters, the rationed sugar, the soaked journals that bled ink into your palms. You remember the way the canyon opened up like a cathedral at dusk, light painting the red rock in gold. You remember Powell waking you in the night just to listen to the river. Years later, when you visit a schoolroom where children learn about Powell's first descent, you stand quietly at the back. The teacher mentions his bravery, his disability, his maps. She doesn't mention you or the others who rode, climbed, starved, and kept going. But you don't mind. You remember what Powell whispered once, sitting on a rock above the rapids, staring down into the churn. The river is like history. It carries us forward, whether we're ready or not. And now, as sleep draws near and the canyon fades into memory, you close your eyes, feeling again the pull of the current, the echo of oars, the wild, wonderful terror of the unknown.
Now, you rest your head and let the voices of explorers drift quietly into the background. The crackle of a campfire lingers far away. Boots are unlaced, journals closed. The stars above you shimmer like ancient trail markers, guiding dreamers west across centuries. You've walked beside men who saw the edge of maps not as limits, but as invitations. You've waded through rivers, climbed jagged peaks, faced storms, hunger, loss, and still pressed forward. The world you sleep in tonight was shaped by their journeys, their guesses, their grit. Some died forgotten. Others became legends. Most were somewhere in between. You feel the weight of time slowing. The creak of leather saddles fades. The hush of canyon winds softens. Even the thunder of rivers quiets to a distant murmur. There's no rush now. No rapids, no climbing, just rest. Let the dust of the trail settle. Let the map fold in your lap. Let your breath fall into the rhythm of stars. And as sleep takes you gently downstream, know that you've journeyed far tonight, not just across geography, but through memory. You are part of a long, winding story. You belong to it. You carry it forward. Good night, traveler.